A woman in disguise walks into a trap she built for herself, but the monster she's trying to scare away sees straight through her costume and refuses to let her go. Tonight, Serafina Vale will discover that sometimes the most dangerous predator isn't the one who destroys you. It's the one who forces you to stop hiding. This is a story about power, obsession, and a marriage contract signed in blood. If you want to know how an invisible girl became a mafia queen, stay until the end and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. Bam. Rain hammered against the stained windows of the cramped apartment like fists demanding entry. Serafina Vale sat hunched over a cracked vanity mirror, painting thick layers of greasy foundation across her skin with the practiced precision of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of disappearing. The cheap makeup smelled like chemicals and desperation. She smeared it on anyway. 24 years old, and she still didn't recognize her own reflection. Tonight, that was the point. She reached for the oversized glasses, frames so hideous they looked like something pulled from a dumpster behind an optometrist's office, and shoved them onto her face. The prescription was wrong, everything blurred at the edges. Perfect. She pulled on the mustard yellow sweater her father had bought her 3 years ago, the one that scratched her skin raw and hung off her shoulders like a punishment. The color made her look sick, jaundiced, forgettable. Exactly what she needed. "Serafina!" Her father's voice cracked through the thin apartment walls like a whip. "You better not embarrass me tonight." She didn't answer. Marco Vela had already done enough embarrassing for both of them. The man had gambled away everything their family owned. The house in the hills, her mother's jewelry, the last shreds of dignity they had left. And when the debts piled so high the collectors started breaking bones, he'd signed a contract Serafina never asked for. A marriage arrangement, with a man she'd never met, a man whose name people whispered in alleys and courtrooms with the same trembling reverence reserved for hurricanes and terminal diagnoses. Lucien Drukov, Mafia king of Naples. Crime lord, executioner in expensive suits. Her father had sold her to a monster to save his own worthless skin. Serafina clenched her jaw so hard her teeth ached. She grabbed the lipstick, a shade of brown so ugly it looked like mud, and smeared it across her mouth. The face staring back at her from the mirror wasn't beautiful. It wasn't striking. It was deliberately, aggressively unremarkable. If she looked pathetic enough, maybe the monster would reject her. Maybe she could walk away from this nightmare before it swallowed her whole. The restaurant Loro sat in the heart of Naples like a jewel box designed to intimidate. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths so crisp they looked like they'd cut your fingers if you touched them wrong. Serafina stepped through the golden doors and immediately felt the weight of every eye in the room. Not because she was beautiful, because she was ridiculous. Conversations stuttered, forks hovered midair. A woman in a diamond necklace actually gasped. Serafina kept her chin down and her shoulders hunched, shuffling toward the private dining area in the back like someone walking toward their own execution. The maitre d' looked at her like she'd tracked mud across his pristine floor. "Miss Vale?" His voice dripped with disdain. "Yes. This way." He led her past tables filled with Naples' elite, politicians, businessmen, socialites dripping in wealth, and she felt their judgment like knives pressed against her spine. The mustard sweater itched. The glasses slipped down her nose. She shoved them back up with a trembling hand. The private room was quieter, darker. A single table sat beneath a low-hanging chandelier, and the chair facing the door was empty. Waiting. Serafina sat down and tried to steady her breathing. Her palms were sweating. She wiped them on the ugly sweater and immediately regretted it because now the fabric clung to her damp skin and made everything worse. Then the air in the restaurant changed. It was subtle at first. A shift in the atmosphere, like the moment before lightning strikes. Conversations outside the private room died mid-sentence. Silverware stopped clinking. Even the soft jazz music seemed to lower its volume as if the world itself was holding its breath. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that announced power before the man attached to them even entered the room. Serafina's heart slammed against her ribs. The door opened. Lucien Drukov stepped inside and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. He was tall, Over 6 feet of controlled violence wrapped in a black suit tailored so perfectly it looked like it had been sewn directly onto his body. Dark hair slicked back, sharp jaw, eyes the color of smoke and steel, cold enough to freeze blood in your veins. He moved like a predator, every step calculated, every muscle coiled with the promise of destruction. Serafina had expected a monster. She wasn't prepared for him to be beautiful. Lucien's gaze swept the room in a single clinical assessment, cataloging exits and threats with the efficiency of someone who'd survived 100 assassination attempts. Then his eyes landed on her and stopped. Serafina resisted the urge to shrink into her chair. She'd worked so hard to make herself repulsive. The makeup, the glasses, the hideous sweater, but Lucien didn't recoil. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He stared at her like he was reading a book, written in a language only he understood. Then he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who'd just realized he was going to enjoy himself far more than he'd anticipated. "Serafina Vale," he said, his voice low and smooth as expensive whiskey. "You went to a lot of trouble tonight." She swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He crossed the room in 3 strides and sat down across from her, moving with the lethal grace of something apex. Up close, he was even more terrifying. Scars traced faint lines along his knuckles. His cologne smelled like cedar and gunpowder. When he leaned forward, the chandelier light caught the edge of a shoulder holster hidden beneath his jacket. Serafina forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm here because my father made me come. I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I," Lucien said calmly. "But here we are." She clenched her fist beneath the table. "Then let's make this easy. You don't want me. I don't want you. We can both walk away and pretend this never happened." "Is that what you think?" His gaze traveled slowly across her face. The thick makeup, the crooked glasses, the deliberate ugliness she'd painted over herself like armor. "That I'm going to take one look at you and run?" "Yes." He reached across the table. Serafina flinched, but Lucien's hand moved with surprising gentleness. He adjusted her glasses, pushing them back up the bridge of her nose where they'd slipped again. His fingers brushed her skin, and she felt the heat of his touch like a brand. "You worked hard to hide yourself," he murmured, his voice dangerously soft. "Little rebel." Her breath caught. "I'm not hiding anything." "Liar!" The word cracked through the air like a gunshot. Lucien leaned back in his chair, studying her with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond pulled from mud. "The foundation is 2 shades too dark for your skin. The glasses are fake. No prescription distortion when I look through them. And that sweater," his mouth curved into something cruel and amused. "You're drowning in it on purpose." Serafina's pulse hammered in her throat. "Maybe I just have bad taste." "No." Lucien's smile widened. "You have excellent taste. That's why you're trying so hard to bury it." He snapped his fingers. A waiter appeared instantly, moving with the nervous energy of someone who knew exactly who he was serving. Lucien didn't even glance at the menu. "Espresso, double shot, 1 sugar, no milk." The waiter scurried away. Serafina stared. "How did you know how you take your coffee?" Lucien tilted his head. "I make it my business to know everything about the people who matter to me." "I don't matter to you. You don't even know me." "Not yet." His eyes glittered with something dark and possessive. "But I will." The waiter returned with the espresso and set it in front of Serafina with trembling hands. She stared at the cup. It was exactly how she liked it. Exactly. Down to the single sugar cube balanced on the saucer. Her stomach twisted. "Drink," Lucien ordered softly. She didn't move. "Are you afraid I poisoned it?" "No." Serafina lifted her chin. "I'm afraid you're insane." Lucien laughed, a low, genuine sound that somehow made him even more terrifying. "You're not the first person to think that, but you're the first one brave enough to say it to my face." He leaned forward again, elbows on the table, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough to count the faint scars along his jaw. "Let me tell you what's going to happen, Serafina," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a blade pressed against her throat. "You're going to stop pretending you're something you're not. You're going to take off that ugly makeup and those ridiculous glasses. You're going to step out of the shadows you've been hiding in for God knows how long. And if I refuse, you won't. You're very confident for someone who just met me. I'm confident because I see what you don't." Lucienne reached out and traced one finger along the edge of her jaw, so lightly it barely registered as touch. "Diamonds still shine in the dark, little rebel, even when you bury them in mud." Serafina jerked back like she'd been burned. "Don't touch me." "You're going to be my wife," Lucian said calmly. "I'll touch you whenever I want." Rage ignited in her chest, hot and wild and reckless. "You don't own me. Not yet." He stood, buttoning his jacket with the same precision he did everything else. "But your father signed a contract, and I always collect what's owed." He dropped a stack of cash on the table, more money than Serafina had seen in months, and started toward the door. Then he paused, turned back. "One more thing," Lucian said, his voice soft and deadly. "The next time I see you, Serafina, you will not be wearing that sweater. You will not be hiding behind cheap makeup. You will show me the real you. And if I don't?" His smile was all teeth. "Then I'll tear the disguise off myself." He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Serafina sat alone in the private dining room, shaking with fury and something else she refused to name. The espresso sat untouched in front of her. She stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up the cup and threw it against the wall. It shattered. Brown liquid streaked down the expensive wallpaper. The sugar cube rolled across the floor and disappeared beneath the table. Serafina pressed her hands against her face and tried to breathe. The monster hadn't rejected her. He'd claimed her. And the worst part, the part that made her stomach churn with something halfway between terror and thrill, was that a small, traitorous voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, she wanted to be claimed. She shoved the thought down deep and buried it beneath layers of rage and fear. But it didn't disappear. It never would. The next morning, Serafina woke to the sound of her father screaming. She bolted upright in bed, heart hammering, and scrambled toward the noise. Marco Vale stood in the middle of their cramped living room, staring at something on the kitchen table with the expression of a man watching his own execution. "What happened?" Serafina demanded. Her father didn't answer. He just pointed. A black box sat on the table, glossy, expensive, tied with a blood-red ribbon. Serafina's hand shook as she opened it. Inside was a dress. Not just any dress. A masterpiece of crimson silk that looked like it cost more than their entire apartment. The fabric shimmered in the weak morning light, and when Serafina lifted it from the box, it unfolded like liquid fire. A note was pinned to the bodice. "Wear this tonight. I'm taking you somewhere you belong. L." Her father grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "You will not embarrass me again. You will wear that dress. You will be perfect. Do you understand?" Serafina yanked free. "I'm not his doll." "You're whatever he wants you to be," Marco's voice cracked with desperation. "Do you have any idea what kind of man Lucian Drakov is? The things he's done? If you insult him, then maybe you shouldn't have sold me to him." The slap came so fast she didn't have time to dodge. Pain exploded across her cheek. She staggered back, hand pressed to her face, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. Her father was breathing hard, his face red with fury and fear. "You will obey, or I will make you obey." Serafina stared at him, really stared. This man who'd spent her entire life crushing her dreams, stealing her freedom, using her as a shield against his own failures. She'd been invisible for so long, hiding behind ugly clothes and bad makeup and quiet obedience, because it was safer than fighting back. But something had shifted last night. Lucian had looked at her and seen something her father never had. Potential. "Fine," Serafina said quietly. "I'll wear the dress." Marco deflated with relief. "Good. Good girl." He left the room, still muttering to himself. Serafina picked up the crimson dress and held it against her body. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Lucienne had known her measurements without ever touching her, had known her coffee order without asking, had seen through her disguise like it was made of glass. The man was dangerous. But maybe, just maybe, he was also her way out. That night, a black car pulled up outside the apartment building. Not a sedan. A Rolls-Royce with tinted windows and chrome that gleamed like a knife's edge. The driver stepped out, a mountain of a man in a dark suit. and opened the rear door without a word. Serafina stepped out of the building in the crimson dress, and the world seemed to pause. The cheap makeup was gone. The ugly glasses were gone. The mustard sweater was stuffed in the bottom of a trash bin 3 blocks away. For the first time in years, she looked like herself. Beautiful. Terrifying. Dangerous in her own right. The driver's eyes widened for just a fraction of a second before his professional mask slammed back into place. He gestured toward the open door. "Mr. Drukov is waiting." Serafina climbed into the car. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Lucien sat on the opposite seat, dressed in another immaculate black suit, watching her with the same unsettling intensity he'd had the night before. But this time, when his gaze traveled over her, something flickered in those cold gray eyes. Hunger. "Better," he said simply. Serafina crossed her arms. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere you'll appreciate." Lucien leaned back, utterly relaxed, like a king lounging on his throne. "I want to show you what your life could look like if you stopped fighting me." "I'm not fighting you. I just don't want to marry you." "Liar." That word again, sharp and precise. "You're terrified of what happens if you let yourself want this." "There's nothing to want." Lucien's smile was slow and predatory. "We'll see." The car glided through the streets of Naples, past the old city and the tourist traps, climbing higher into the hills where the real money lived. Serafina watched the world outside blur into streaks of light and shadow. They stopped in front of a building that made her breath catch. A skyscraper. All black glass and steel, towering over the city like a monument to power. The Drukov Empire's headquarters. She'd heard rumors about this place, whispered stories about what happened in the upper floors, the deals made and broken, the lives ended with a signature on a contract. "Come," Lucien said, stepping out of the car. Serafina followed because she didn't have a choice. The lobby was marble and chrome. Security guards in tactical gear flanked every entrance. Cameras tracked their movement with mechanical precision. Lucien moved through it all like he owned the air itself, and everyone they passed either bowed their heads or stepped aside. This was his kingdom. They took a private elevator to the top floor. The doors opened onto a space that defied description. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked all of Naples, the bay, the old city, Vesuvius looming in the distance. The office was minimalist, a massive desk, leather chairs, art on the walls that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. But it was the people waiting inside that made Serafina's blood run cold. 6 men stood in a semicircle, all of them dressed in expensive suits, all of them radiating the kind of casual violence that came from decades of survival in a world where weakness got you killed. Lucien's capos, his inner circle. "Gentlemen," Lucien said smoothly, "this is Serafina Vale, my fiancée." The word fiancé hit the room like a grenade. One of the men, older, with gray hair and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, laughed outright. "This is the girl? The one you're marrying?" "Yes, Vittorio." Lucien's voice didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped. "Is there a problem?" "Vittorio Russo." Serafina recognized the name from whispered conversations. Old guard, loyal to Lucien's father, suspicious of anyone new. Vittorio gestured at Serafina like she was a piece of furniture. "She's a decoration. What's she going to do, sit there and look pretty while we discuss business?" The other men chuckled. Serafina's hands clenched into fists. Lucien pulled out a chair at the head of the conference table. "Sit." She sat. Vittorio sneered. "Adorable." "Proceed," Lucien said, settling into his own chair. "What's the status of the shipment?" One of the younger capos, slick hair, nervous energy, cleared his throat. "The artifacts arrived this morning, 20 crates, everything from the museum job in Rome. And the buyer? Still negotiating, but we're looking at scrapping most of it. Easier to melt down and sell the materials." Serafina's head snapped up. "You're going to melt them down?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Vittorio's sneer widened. "Did someone ask for your opinion, sweetheart?" "No." Serafina stood, her heart pounding. "But I'm giving it anyway." Lucien leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm listening." She took a breath. This was insane. These men could kill her without breaking a sweat, but something about the casual way they talked about destroying priceless art made her blood boil. Those artifacts, Serafina said slowly, are worth significantly more intact than melted down. If you're talking about the shipment, I think you are. Renaissance bronzes, Byzantine manuscripts, Roman glass, you'd be destroying millions in value. Vittorio scoffed. And how would you know? Because I studied art history at the university before my father pulled me out to pay his debts. Serafina's voice was steel now. I know exactly what you have in those crates, and if you melt them down, you're idiots. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Vittorio's face turned purple. You little... Vittorio. Lucien's voice cut through the room like a knife. Let her finish. Serafina met his eyes, gray and unreadable, watching her like she was the most interesting thing he'd seen in years. She turned to the slick-haired capo. Where are the crates now? Warehouse district? Why? Take me there. I'll inventory everything and tell you exactly what you have. Then you can decide whether to keep your current buyer or find someone who'll pay what it's actually worth. Vittorio slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. She's right. Lucien stood buttoning his jacket. Gentlemen, we're going to the warehouse. Now. The capos exchanged glances. None of them dared argue. The warehouse smelled like rust and old wood. Crates were stacked floor to ceiling, each one marked with coded labels. Serafina walked between them with growing excitement, her fear temporarily forgotten in the face of something she actually understood. She pried open the first crate and pulled out a bronze statue. A Roman soldier, perfectly preserved, the patina rich and untouched. 4th century, she breathed. Museum quality, worth at least $200,000 on the black market, maybe more to the right collector. She moved to the next crate. Byzantine manuscripts. The next, glass vessels so delicate they looked like they'd shatter if you breathed on them. With each piece, she cataloged the value, the historical significance, the potential buyers. The capos watched in stunned silence as this girl in a crimson dress dismantled their entire plan with nothing but knowledge and confidence. When she finished, the total value of the shipment had tripled. Vittorio looked like he wanted to strangle her. Lucien looked like he wanted to devour her. Gentlemen, Lucien said quietly, I believe we owe Serafina an apology. No one spoke. Lucien crossed the warehouse floor in 3 strides and took Serafina's hand, lifted it to his lips, kissed her knuckles in front of every single one of his capos. My equal, he said, his voice ringing with authority. Treat her as such, or answer to me. The message was clear. Serafina wasn't decoration, she was power. Back in the Rolls-Royce, Serafina's hands wouldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her hollow and dizzy. She'd just walked into a room full of killers and told them they were wrong, and lived. Lucien watched her from across the seat. You're full of surprises. I didn't mean to Yes, you did. He leaned forward. You walked into that room ready to prove yourself. And you did. Your men hate me now. Some of them. Lucien's smile was sharp. The ones who matter are impressed. Vittorio's opinion is irrelevant. He looked like he wanted to kill me. He wants to kill everyone. It's his default state. Lucien reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so casual and intimate it made her breath catch. But he won't touch you. No one will, because you belong to me now. Serafina pulled back. I don't belong to anyone. Keep telling yourself that, little rebel. Lucien's eyes gleamed. Eventually, you'll realize the truth. What truth? That you don't want to escape this. He leaned in close enough that she could feel his breath against her skin. You want to conquer it. The car pulled up outside her apartment building. Serafina scrambled for the door, desperate for distance, for air, for anything that wasn't the suffocating intensity of Lucien Drakov's presence. But before she could leave, he caught her wrist. Tomorrow night, he said, I'm taking you shopping. You need everything. His grip tightened, not painful, but inescapable. And I'm going to give it to you whether you want it or not. He released her. Serafina fled. She made it to her apartment, locked the door, and collapsed against it, breathing hard. The crimson dress clung to her skin. Her reflection in the hallway mirror showed a stranger. Beautiful, powerful, dangerous. Someone her father wouldn't recognize, someone she barely recognized. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, and Serafina realized with creeping certainty that the storm wasn't outside. It was just beginning. The shopping trip wasn't a request. At 9 the next morning, the black Rolls-Royce appeared outside Serafina's building like clockwork, idling at the curb with the engine purring. She watched it from her bedroom window, coffee cup trembling in her hands, debating whether she could just refuse to go downstairs. Then her father burst into the room. "He's here!" Marco's eyes were wild, desperate. "Get dressed, now!" "I'm not going." The coffee cup shattered against the wall before she even registered her father moving. Brown liquid dripped down the faded wallpaper. Marco grabbed her shoulders hard enough to leave fingerprints. "You will get in that car," he hissed, his breath reeking of stale cigarettes and last night's whiskey. "You will smile. You will be grateful. Because if you ruin this for me, I swear I'll—" "You'll what?" Serafina wrenched free. "Sell me twice?" His hand rose. She didn't flinch. For the first time in her life, she stared him down, and something in her father's face crumbled. He lowered his arms slowly, breathing hard. "Just go," he whispered. "Please." Serafina grabbed her jacket and walked out. The driver opened the rear door without comment. She slid inside, expecting to find Lucien waiting, but the back seat was empty except for a single white box tied with black ribbon. She opened it. Inside was a leather jacket. Not just any leather, soft as butter, black as midnight, perfectly tailored. A note was pinned to the collar in sharp, angular handwriting. "Wear this. The dress was for them. This is for you." Serafina ran her fingers over the leather. It was beautiful, expensive, the kind of thing she'd never owned in her life. She shrugged it on, and it fit like it had been made specifically for her body, which it probably had. The car pulled away from the curb. 20 minutes later, they stopped in front of a boutique in the fashion district, the kind of place with mannequins in the windows wearing outfits that cost more than most people's rent. Serafina stared through the tinted glass at the gleaming storefront. "This is a mistake," she muttered. The driver didn't respond. He just opened her door. Lucien was waiting inside, leaning against a display table like he owned the building, which he probably did. He straightened when she entered, and his eyes traveled over the leather jacket with obvious satisfaction. "Better," he said. "You keep saying that. Because you keep improving." He gestured toward the rows of clothing. "Pick whatever you want." Serafina crossed her arms. "I don't need anything. You're wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation. You absolutely need something." Lucien stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Stop fighting me on this." "Why do you care what I wear?" "Because you're mine." The words were soft, possessive, final. "And I take care of what's mine." A saleswoman appeared with a champagne flute and a smile so bright it looked painful. "Mr. Drakov, everything is ready. Should I—" "Let her browse," Lucien said without looking away from Serafina. "Alone." The woman vanished. Serafina walked through the boutique like she was navigating a minefield. Everything was beautiful. Everything was terrifying. Silk blouses that probably cost more than her father's monthly gambling losses. Jeans that fit like they'd been engineered by scientists. Dresses in colors she'd forgotten existed. She reached out to touch a deep green sweater, cashmere, impossibly soft, and pulled her hand back like it had burned her. "What are you afraid of?" Lucien's voice came from directly behind her. She spun around. He'd followed her silently through the racks, watching. "I'm not afraid." "Liar." He pulled the green sweater off the rack and held it up against her. "This would look stunning on you." "I don't want it." "Why not?" "Because—" Serafina's throat tightened. "Because the moment I put on clothes like this, I stop being invisible. People see me, and when people see me, they expect things." Lucien's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "What things?" "Perfection. Performance. They expect me to be something I'm not." "No." He set the sweater aside and cupped her face with both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "They expect you to be exactly what you are, and you're terrified they'll like it." The words hit like a punch to the sternum. Serafina jerked away, blinking hard against the sudden sting in her eyes. "You don't know anything about me. I know you've spent your entire life making yourself small because it was safer than being seen. Lucian's voice was relentless, cutting through every defense she'd built. I know your father crushed every dream you ever had. I know you're brilliant and furious and so goddamn beautiful it makes my chest hurt to look at you. She stared at him. Why are you doing this? Because someone should have done it years ago. He turned and called to the saleswoman. We'll take everything in her size. Have it delivered to my penthouse. Lucienne, no arguments. He looked back at her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression. Vulnerability hidden beneath layers of control. Let me give you this, Serafina. Please. The word please from Lucian Drakov's mouth was so unexpected, so jarringly human, that she couldn't find words to respond. She just nodded. They left the boutique with Serafina still wearing the leather jacket, and she felt different, dangerous, like someone who mattered. The feeling lasted exactly 45 minutes. That's when Lucian's phone rang. He answered without hesitation. Talk. Serafina watched his expression shift, from neutral to sharp to something cold and lethal. When he hung up, his jaw was tight. Change of plans, he said. We're going to the docks. Why? Because someone just tried to kill one of my shipments. His eyes were ice. And I need to find out who. The shipping docks sprawled across the industrial waterfront like a graveyard of steel. Containers stacked 3 stories high, rusted and graffitied, cast long shadows in the afternoon sun. Lucien's car pulled into a warehouse complex surrounded by chain-link fence and armed guards. Serafina climbed out behind him, and the air tasted like salt and diesel. Stay close, Lucian ordered. She did. Inside the main warehouse, chaos. Men shouted in Italian, moving crates and checking inventory. Lucien walked straight to the center where 3 of his capos stood around a shipping container with its doors torn open. Vittorio Russo saw them coming and sneered. Brought your decorator to a crime scene? Lucien ignored him. Status, one of the younger capo, the same slick-haired man from the meeting, gestured at the container. Someone sabotaged the hydraulics. When we opened it, half the shipment was crushed. We lost $2 million in product. Who knew the route? Only inner circle, which means... The capo hesitated. Which means we have a leak, Lucien finished. His voice was calm, but Serafina could see the violence simmering beneath the surface. Find them. Vittorio stepped forward. I'll handle the interrogations. No. Lucien turned to Serafina. She will. Every head in the warehouse swiveled toward her. Serafina's stomach dropped. What? You have a sharp eye, Lucien said. You notice things other people miss. Walk through the container. Tell me what doesn't belong. I'm not a detective. You're whatever I need you to be. His eyes locked onto hers. Do this. It wasn't a request. Serafina stepped into the container on shaking legs. The interior was a disaster. Crushed crates, broken glass, twisted metal. But as she moved deeper into the wreckage, something caught her eye. A tool. Hydraulic wrench. Standard issue. Except it had a marking on the handle. Small. Almost invisible. A serial number. She picked it up carefully and walked back out. This was left behind. Lucien took the wrench, examined it. Track the serial, now. The slick-haired capo pulled out his phone, fingers flying. 30 seconds later, his face went pale. It's registered to Alessandro Conti. The name dropped into the warehouse like a grenade. Alessandro Conti, one of Lucien's mid-level capos. Ambitious, ruthless, always angling for more power. Vittorio's face twisted with rage. That traitorous little... Where is he? Lucien's voice was glacial. His club, downtown. Lucien turned and walked toward the exit. Serafina hurried after him. What are you going to do? What I always do, Lucien said without breaking stride. Remove the problem. The nightclub inferno pulsed with bass so heavy it rattled Serafina's ribs. Neon lights cut through the darkness. Red, purple, electric blue. Bodies packed the dance floor in a writhing mass of heat and sweat and desperation. Lucien walked through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. People scrambled out of his way instinctively, sensing predator. Alessandro Conti sat in the VIP section on the second floor, surrounded by women and expensive bottles, laughing. He was young, maybe 30, handsome in a slick, dangerous way. Gold watch, designer suit, the kind of man who thought he was untouchable. He saw Lucien and went pale. "Boss?" Alessandro stood quickly, forcing a smile. "What brings you—" Lucien punched him in the throat. Conti went down choking, hands clutching his crushed windpipe. The women scattered with shrieks. Lucien dragged him up by the collar and slammed him against the VIP table hard enough to crack the wood. "You sabotaged my shipment," Lucien said conversationally. "I don't know what—" Lucien drove his knee into Conti's ribs. Bone cracked. Conti screamed. Serafina stood frozen at the edge of the VIP section, watching. She should have been horrified, terrified, but something dark and primal in her chest whispered good. This man had tried to hurt Lucien, and Lucien was hers. The thought shocked her so badly she almost missed what happened next. Conti gasped out words between broken breaths. "Wasn't me. I was paid. Russians. They wanted you distracted." Lucien went very still. "Distracted from what?" "I don't know, I swear. You're lying." Lucien reached into his jacket. Serafina moved without thinking. She stepped forward, put her hand on Lucien's arm. "Wait." Every eye in the VIP section turned to her. Lucien's hand was wrapped around a gun. She could feel the cold metal through his jacket, feel the tension in his muscles, coiled and ready to kill. "Let me talk to him," Serafina said quietly. "Why?" "Because you're too angry, and angry people make mistakes." Lucien stared at her for a long, dangerous moment. Then he stepped back. Serafina crouched down so she was eye level with Alessandro Conti. Blood dripped from his mouth. His ribs were definitely broken, but his eyes were sharp with calculation. "You're working with the Russians," she said calmly. "But you're not loyal to them. You're loyal to yourself." Conti tried to laugh. It came out as a wheeze. "So here's what's going to happen," Serafina continued. "You're going to tell us everything they told you, every detail, every plan, and in exchange, Lucien lets you walk out of here alive. And if I don't," Serafina leaned in close, "then I'll quote Dante to you while he puts bullets in your kneecaps. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. The inferno. Fitting, don't you think?" Conti's face went gray. He talked. The Russians were planning a hostile takeover, 3 major syndicates working together. They'd been sabotaging Lucien's operations for months, slow, methodical, designed to look like bad luck. The crushed shipment was just the latest move. The real strike was coming in 72 hours, a coordinated attack on Lucien's financial assets, his legitimate businesses, his political connections, everything that kept the Drukov empire standing. When Conti finished talking, Lucien pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. By the time he hung up, countermeasures were already in motion. He looked down at Conti. "You have 10 seconds to disappear. If I ever see you in Naples again, I'll kill you slowly." Conti scrambled to his feet and ran. Lucien turned to Serafina. "That was either very smart or very stupid. Which do you think?" "I haven't decided yet." He holstered his gun and took her hand. "Come on, we're leaving." They made it halfway to the exit before the explosion tore through the back wall. The blast wave hit like a physical force. Serafina went flying, ears ringing, vision whiting out. She hit the floor hard and tasted blood. Screams erupted around her. Smoke poured through the club in choking clouds. Someone grabbed her arm. Lucien. His face was cut and bleeding, but his grip was iron. He hauled her to her feet and dragged her toward the emergency exit. Behind them, the building groaned. Fire licked up the walls. They burst out into the alley just as the ceiling collapsed. Serafina couldn't hear anything except ringing. Her lungs burned. Lucien shoved her against the brick wall, checking her for injuries with hands that shook almost imperceptibly. "You're bleeding," she managed to say. "So are you." His driver appeared with the car, tires screeching. They piled into the back seat as gunfire erupted from somewhere down the alley. The Rolls-Royce peeled out, bulletproof windows absorbing impacts with dull thuds. Serafina pressed her hands to her ears, trying to stop the ringing. Lucien pulled her against his chest, one arm wrapped around her shoulders, the other hand still gripping his gun. "They tried to kill us," she whispered. "They failed." His voice was raw. "They'll regret it." The car took them to Lucien's penthouse. Serafina had never seen it before. A fortress of glass and steel perched 50 floors above Naples, the entire city spread out below like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. Lucien led her inside, through the main living area with its minimalist furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows, down a hallway to a bedroom bigger than her entire apartment. "Sit," he ordered, pointing at the bed. She sat. He disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a first aid kit. Then he crouched in front of her and started cleaning the cuts on her face with antiseptic that stung like fire. Serafina hissed, "Hold still. You're not exactly gentle. I'm keeping you alive. Gentle is optional." But his touch was careful, methodical. When he finished with her face, he moved to her hands, picking glass fragments out of her palms with tweezers. Serafina watched him work. This close, she could see the scars on his knuckles, the faint white line along his jaw, the way his hands never quite stopped shaking. "You're scared," she said. Lucien's eyes snapped to hers. "I'm never scared." "Liar." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You could have died tonight." "So could you." "I'm used to it." He set down the tweezers and cupped her face, thumb tracing the cut above her eyebrow. "You're not." "Maybe I need to get used to it," Serafina said, "if I'm going to survive in your world." "You're not staying in my world." She blinked. "What?" Lucien stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His silhouette was backlit by the city lights, all sharp angles and coiled tension. "This was a mistake. I thought I could protect you. I thought—" He broke off, jaw clenched. "I was wrong." "Lucien, tomorrow I'm putting you on a plane, out of Italy, somewhere safe. I'll pay off your father's debts and dissolve the contract. You'll be free." Serafina stood, legs shaking. "I don't want to leave." "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do." She crossed the room until she was standing directly in front of him. "You don't get to make this decision for me." "I'm trying to save your life." "I didn't ask you to." The words ripped out of her, raw and furious. "I didn't ask for any of this. But you forced your way in. You made me stop hiding. You made me feel like I mattered." Her voice cracked. "You don't get to just throw me away now because it's inconvenient." Lucien stared at her, breathing hard. "You have no idea what you're asking for." "Then show me." The air between them crackled with electricity. Dangerous, inevitable. Lucien's control shattered. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and violent and raw, all the fear and fury of the night channeled into something combustible. Serafina kissed him back just as fiercely, hands fisting in his shirt, every carefully constructed wall between them crumbling to dust. When they finally broke apart, both breathing ragged, Lucien pressed his forehead to hers. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "Probably." Serafina's hands were still tangled in his shirt. "But I'm not leaving." "You're insane." "You made me this way." He laughed, broken, helpless. "Yeah, I did." The penthouse phone rang. Lucien answered, his expression shifting from vulnerable to lethal in seconds. He listened. Hung up. "What?" Serafina asked. "Vittorio just called an emergency meeting, all capos. Now." His eyes were flat, cold. "Someone leaked the location of my offshore accounts to the feds." "Conti... already gone. This is someone else. Someone closer." Lucien pulled away from her, buttoning his jacket with mechanical precision. "Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Let me come with you." "Absolutely not." "Lucien..." He grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me. Whoever's behind this wants me distracted, vulnerable. If you're with me, you become leverage. Do you understand?" Serafina wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. "Okay," she whispered. He kissed her once more, quick, fierce, and then he was gone. The penthouse door locked behind him with a heavy click. Serafina stood alone in the enormous living room, surrounded by glass walls and the glittering city below. Her reflection stared back at her from every surface. The leather jacket, the cuts on her face, the wild look in her eyes. She looked dangerous. She looked like someone who belonged in Lucian's world. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her smile. Then the lights went out. All of them. The entire penthouse plunged into darkness. Even the city below flickered and died. A rolling blackout spreading across Naples like a wave. Serafina's heart hammered. She grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. Nothing. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Slow, deliberate. Not Lucian. The penthouse door exploded inward with a deafening crash. 3 men in tactical gear poured through, weapons raised. Serafina scrambled backward, looking for an exit, a weapon, anything. One of the men leveled a gun at her chest. "Serafina Vale," he said in accented English. Russian. "You're coming with us." "Like hell I am." She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the side table and hurled it at his head. It connected with a satisfying crunch. The man went down screaming. The other 2 charged. Serafina ran. She made it to Lucian's study and slammed the door, throwing the lock. Her hands shook as she searched frantically for anything she could use. The desk drawers were locked. The walls were bare except a safe, hidden behind a painting. She yanked the painting aside. The safe had a biometric scanner, fingerprint and retinal, completely useless to her. Unless... Serafina remembered Lucian's words from the warehouse. "You notice things other people miss." She looked closer at the safe. There was a scratch near the bottom corner, fresh, and beneath it, something that looked like a backup keypad. 6 digits. She tried Lucian's birthday. Nothing. His father's death date. Nothing. The door behind her started splintering under repeated impacts. Serafina closed her eyes, thinking. What would Lucian use? What mattered to him? She tried the date they first met. The safe clicked open. Inside was a gun. Serafina had never held a weapon in her life. But her hands moved on instinct, checking the magazine the way she'd seen in movies, flipping off the safety. The door burst open. She fired. The recoil nearly knocked her over, but the shot went wide, slamming into the wall. The Russians dove for cover. Serafina fired again and again. Wild, panicked shots that gave her just enough time to run. She made it to the bedroom and locked herself in the bathroom. It was marble and chrome, sterile and cold. No windows. One door. A trap. Serafina pressed her back against the wall, gun clutched in trembling hands, and tried not to scream. The bathroom door exploded. A man stepped through, weapon raised. Serafina pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The Russian smiled. Then the window behind him shattered. A figure swung through on a repelling line, landed in a crouch, and put 3 bullets in the Russian's chest before he could react. Lucien. He looked like death incarnate, covered in blood that wasn't his, eyes wild, breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. Serafina shook her head, mute. Lucian crossed the bathroom in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering, smell the gunpowder and smoke clinging to his clothes. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you." Outside, sirens wailed. Police, ambulances. The cavalry arriving too late. Lucian pulled back just enough to look at her face. "You fired a gun." "I missed." "You tried. That's what matters." His thumb brushed her cheek. "You're not running." "No." Serafina met his eyes. "I'm not." And in that moment, standing in a bathroom surrounded by broken glass and blood, Serafina realized the truth. She'd crossed a line tonight, fired a weapon, defended his home, chose his world over the safety of invisibility. There was no going back. Lucian seemed to realize it too. His expression shifted, relief and resignation, and something darker, hungrier. "Then we do this together," he said. "Together," Serafina agreed. He kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning. And somewhere in the shattered penthouse, surrounded by evidence of the war that had just begun, Serafina Vale stopped being a victim. She became a weapon. The penthouse looked like a war zone. Serafina stood in the center of the shattered living room as dawn broke over Naples, painting the destruction in shades of gray and gold. Bullet holes scarred the walls. Blood stained the marble floors. The floor-to-ceiling windows were spider-webbed with cracks where bodies had slammed against them. 3 dead Russians, 2 unconscious, one who'd managed to escape before Lucien's security team arrived. Lucien paced near those windows, phone pressed to his ear, issuing orders in rapid-fire Italian. His shirt was torn and bloody. A cut above his left eye dripped steadily, but he didn't seem to notice. Serafina's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd wrapped them around a mug of coffee someone had given her, but the liquid had gone cold an hour ago. She couldn't remember drinking any of it. Vittorio Russo arrived with 4 other capos, tracking mud and tension into the penthouse. His eyes swept the carnage with professional detachment before landing on Serafina. "The girl's still here," he said flatly. Lucien ended his call. "She stays. She's a liability. Look at this mess. She killed one of them." Lucien's voice was ice, with a gun she'd never fired before. "While you were busy covering your own ass across town." Vittorio's face darkened. "You think I had something to do with this?" "I think someone told the Russians exactly when I'd be at that emergency meeting you called." Lucien crossed the room until he was inches from Vittorio's face. "I think someone gave them access codes to my penthouse. And I think if I find out it was you, I'll feed you to the bay piece by piece." The other capos shifted nervously. No one spoke. Vittorio didn't flinch. "I've been loyal to this family for 30 years. 30 years is a long time to grow resentful." Lucien's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "Especially when you think the boss is getting soft because of a woman." "Are you?" Vittorio shot back. "Getting soft?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Serafina set down her coffee mug with a sharp click. "If he was soft, you'd already be dead." Every eye turned to her. She stood, ignoring the way her legs trembled. "Lucien gave you a chance to explain yourself. That's more mercy than most people in this room would show. So either prove your loyalty or admit you're the traitor, but stop wasting our time with posturing." Vittorio stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Then he laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. "You've got teeth," he said. "I'll give you that." "Answer the question," Lucien ordered. Vittorio pulled out his phone and tossed it on the coffee table. "Check my calls, my messages, my location history, everything. I was at the docks when the attack happened, coordinating shipment routes with our contacts in Marseille. 12 witnesses. You want their names?" Lucien picked up the phone, scrolled through it with clinical precision. His expression didn't change, but Serafina saw the tension in his shoulders ease fractionally. "He's clean," Lucien said finally. "Told you." Vittorio snatched his phone back. "The leak's coming from somewhere else." One of the younger capos, the slick-haired man Serafina recognized from the warehouse, cleared his throat. "Boss, we swept the penthouse. Found tracking devices in 3 rooms, military grade. Someone's been watching you for weeks." Lucien's jaw clenched. "Where?" "Bedroom, office, and—" The capo hesitated. "The studio." Serafina's breath caught. The studio. The private art space Lucien had built for her. The one place in this entire fortress that was supposed to be sacred. Someone had violated it. "Show me," Lucien said quietly. They followed the capo down the hallway to a door Serafina hadn't noticed before. Lucien pressed his palm to a biometric scanner and the lock clicked open. The studio took her breath away. Natural light poured through skylights. The walls were lined with sculpting tools, rare art books, canvases in every size. A workbench sat in the center, covered with clay and wire and everything she'd ever needed to create. It was perfect. It was poisoned. The tracking device was hidden inside a vintage art book. The Birth of Venus. Lucien pulled it out carefully, examining the tiny camera embedded in the spine. "How long has this been here?" Serafina whispered. "Since I had the studio built." Lucien's voice was hollow. 2 weeks before I met you." The implications hit like a freight train. Someone knew about Serafina before their first meeting. Someone had planned this entire thing, the marriage contract, the courtship, the threats, all of it orchestrated. "Who knew you were building this room?" Vittorio demanded. "Only my private contractor." Lucien crushed the device in his fist. "Marco Bellini. He's designed every safe house I own." "Where is he now?" "Dead." Lucien dropped the pieces on the floor. "Car accident 3 days ago. Brake failure." The room went silent. Serafina's mind raced. A contractor who knew all of Lucien's properties. who'd been killed right before the Russians attacked, who could have leaked everything to... It's not just the Russians, she said slowly. Everyone looked at her. Think about it. Serafina's voice gained strength. The sabotaged shipment, the offshore accounts leaked to the feds, the attack on the penthouse. These aren't isolated incidents. They're coordinated, professional. Someone's been dismantling your empire piece by piece, and they're using the Russians as a smokescreen. Lucian's eyes narrowed. Who? Someone close enough to know your routines, your properties, your vulnerabilities. Serafina met his gaze. Someone inside your inner circle. Vittorio swore viciously. If there's a snake in this organization, there is. Lucian's voice was deadly calm. And we're going to find them. He turned to the slick-haired capo. Pull every communication from the last 6 months. Phone records, emails, bank transfers. Anyone in the inner circle who's had contact with Russian syndicates or offshore accounts. I want names by tonight. The capo nodded and fled. Lucien looked at Vittorio. Double security on all properties. No one moves without a detail. No one meets anyone outside the organization without my approval. Done. And Vittorio? Lucien's expression was granite. If I find out you're lying to me, I'll make sure your death takes days. Vittorio didn't even blink. Understood, boss. He left with the remaining capos. Serafina and Lucian stood alone in the ruined studio, surrounded by beauty that had been turned into a trap. I'm sorry, Lucian said quietly. For what? For bringing you into this. For thinking I could give you something pure when everything I touch turns to blood. He wouldn't look at her. You should leave, while you still can. Serafina walked to the workbench and picked up a lump of clay. It was cool and dense in her hands. She'd forgotten what it felt like to create, to make something from nothing. When I was 12, she said, not looking at him, my mother took me to a museum in Rome. We spent the entire day walking through galleries. She let me sketch everything, told me I could be anything I wanted. She squeezed the clay until it oozed between her fingers. She died 6 months later, cancer, and my father burned every sketchbook I owned because he said art was a waste of time. Serafina's voice was flat, emotionless. I stopped creating, stopped dreaming, made myself invisible because it was easier than wanting things I'd never have. She finally looked at Lucien. Then you came along and built me this studio, gave me permission to want again. And yes, someone used it to spy on you. Yes, it's tainted now. She set the clay down gently. But it's still the most beautiful thing anyone's ever done for me. Lucien crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her like she was the last solid thing in a collapsing world. Serafina kissed him back just as desperately, tasting blood and fear and something that felt dangerously close to love. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. Stay, he whispered. Please. I'm not going anywhere. His phone buzzed. Lucien checked it and his entire body went rigid. What? Serafina asked. The capo found something. His voice was strange, hollow. We need to go, now. They took the private elevator down to Lucien's underground garage. The slick-haired capo was waiting next to an armored SUV, tablet in hand, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Show me, Lucien ordered. The capo handed over the tablet. Bank transfers, offshore account in the Caymans. It's been active for 8 months. Lucien scrolled through the data, his expression growing darker with each line. Serafina leaned over his shoulder, trying to make sense of the numbers. Then she saw the account name. Marco Vele. Her father. The world tilted sideways. No, Serafina breathed. That's not... He wouldn't... 8 months ago, your father received 2 million euros from a shell corporation tied to the Russian syndicate. Lucien's voice was clinical, detached. He's been feeding them information ever since. Locations, schedules, personnel. Serafina grabbed the tablet, scanning frantically. The evidence was damning, deposits matching every major attack on Lucian's empire. Communications timestamps that aligned perfectly with sabotage incidents. Location data showing her father meeting with known Russian operatives. He sold you out, the capo said quietly. Sold you both out. Serafina's legs gave out. She caught herself against the SUV, breathing hard, her vision swimming. Her father hadn't just gambled away their fortune. He'd sold his own daughter to a mafia boss as part of a conspiracy to destroy him. The marriage contract wasn't desperation, it was strategy. Put Serafina close to Lucian, make her a distraction, use her to weaken the king before the Russians moved in for the kill. She'd been a weapon aimed at Lucien's heart from the very beginning, and she'd never known. Where is he? Lucien's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. The old apartment, the capo said. We have eyes on the building. Good. Lucian turned to Serafina. His face was a mask. Cold, emotionless, the crime lord instead of the man who'd kissed her in the studio. You stay here. Like hell I do. Serafina, he's my father. Her voice cracked on the word. I need to hear him say it. I need to know why. Lucian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. They drove through Naples in silence. Serafina stared out the window, watching the city blur past, and tried to remember a single time her father had looked at her with anything other than disappointment or greed. She came up empty. The apartment building looked exactly the same as it had 2 days ago. Peeling paint, broken mailboxes, graffiti on the walls. Serafina climbed out of the SUV and walked toward the entrance like she was moving through water. Lucien's security team swept the building first. Then they gave the all clear. Marco Val sat at the kitchen table in the cramped apartment, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him. He looked up when Serafina and Lucien entered, and for just a second, fear flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by a sneer. Took you long enough, Marco said. Serafina couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what she was seeing. Lucien pulled out a chair and sat down across from Marco with terrifying calm. You've been working with the Russians. Took you long enough to figure that out, too. Marco poured himself another glass. I thought the great Lucien Drukov was supposed to be untouchable. Turns out you're just another man who thinks with his dick. Serafina flinched. Lucien didn't react. Why? Why? Marco laughed bitterly. Because I was drowning in debt. Because your father destroyed my business 20 years ago and left me with nothing. Because when the Russians offered me a way out, I took it. You sold your daughter. I gave her a purpose. Marco's eyes were cold. She was useless anyway. Hiding in her room, painting worthless pictures, dreaming about a life she'd never have. At least this way she could be valuable. The words hit Serafina like physical blows. Lucien's hand moved to his gun. You used her as bait. I used her as a distraction, and it worked perfectly. Marco drained his glass. You fell for her, got sloppy, started making mistakes. The Russians were supposed to move in 2 weeks ago, but you were too busy playing house to notice. What changed? Lucien's voice was dangerously soft. She did. Marco's gaze slid to Serafina with contempt. She was supposed to stay weak, scared, but you turned her into something else. And when she started actually helping you instead of distracting you, the Russians got impatient. Serafina found her voice. It came out small and broken. Did you ever love me? Marco looked at her like she was an insect. You were insurance. Your mother wanted you. I tolerated you. When she died, you became a burden I couldn't afford. Something inside Serafina shattered. All those years of making herself invisible, of trying to be good enough, quiet enough, small enough to earn her father's approval. And he'd never cared, never once. She'd been nothing to him except a tool. Lucien stood slowly. You have 10 seconds to tell me where the Russians are planning their next move. Marco laughed. Or what? You'll kill me? I'm already dead. The moment I took their money, I signed my death warrant. They don't leave loose ends. Neither do I. Lucien pulled his gun. Wait. Serafina stepped forward, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Let me. Both men stared at her. She held out her hand to Lucien. Give me the gun. Serafina. He used me, sold me, treated me like garbage my entire life. Her eyes were dry, cold. I want to be the one who ends it. Lucien hesitated for only a second, then he placed the gun in her hand. The weight was familiar now. She'd held it in the bathroom while Russians tried to kill her. She knew how it felt to pull the trigger. Serafina raised the weapon and pointed it at her father's chest. Marco's sneer faltered. You don't have the guts. Maybe not. Serafina's finger tightened on the trigger. But I guess we'll find out. The moment stretched, taut, terrible. Then Serafina lowered the gun. "I'm not like you," she said quietly. "I won't become a killer just to prove a point." She handed the weapon back to Lucian. Marco's relief lasted exactly 3 seconds. That's when the window exploded. Glass shattered inward. A canister rolled across the floor, hissing. Smoke poured out in thick clouds, acrid and choking. Serafina couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Gunfire erupted from outside. Lucian grabbed her and dragged her to the floor. Through the smoke, she could hear shouting in Russian. Boots on the stairs. More windows breaking. "They're here!" Marco wheezed, crawling toward the door. "The Russians! They knew you'd come!" Lucian pulled Serafina toward the back bedroom. "Move!" They made it 3 steps before the apartment door burst open. 4 men in tactical gear poured through, weapons raised. Lucien fired twice, dropping 2 of them. Serafina scrambled for cover behind the couch as bullets chewed through the furniture. Marco made it to the hallway and ran. "Coward!" Serafina screamed after him. One of the Russians tackled Lucien from behind. They went down hard, grappling. Lucien drove his elbow into the man's throat and grabbed his weapon, but the second Russian was already aiming. Serafina didn't think. She launched herself at the Russian, slamming into him with all her weight. They crashed into the wall. His gun went off, the shot wild, punching a hole in the ceiling. Serafina clawed at his face, desperate and feral. He backhanded her hard enough to split her lip. She tasted blood, vision blurring. The Russian raised his gun again. Lucian put 3 bullets in his back. The man dropped. Lucian hauled Serafina to her feet. "Can you run?" She nodded, dizzy. They bolted for the fire escape. Behind them, more boots thundered up the stairs. Voices shouting coordinates. The Russians weren't just attacking. They were surrounding the building. This was a trap, and Marco had led them straight into it. They made it to the roof as helicopters appeared overhead, searchlights cutting through the smoke. Lucien pulled Serafina behind an air conditioning unit, breathing hard. "How many?" she gasped. "Too many." He checked his gun. 4 rounds left. They brought an army. Below, the building was surrounded. Black SUVs blocked every exit. Tactical teams moved with military precision. They were pinned. Lucien pulled out his phone. No signal. Jammed. "We're not getting out of this," Serafina said. "Yes, we are." Lucien grabbed her face with both hands, forcing her to look at him. "I didn't bring you this far to lose you now." "Lucien?" "I love you." The words came out raw, desperate. "I know it's insane. I know we barely know each other. But I love you, Serafina, and I am not letting you die on this roof." Tears burned her eyes. "I love you too." He kissed her once, hard and fierce. Then he stood up, gun raised, and started firing at the helicopters. "What are you doing?" Serafina screamed. "Giving you a chance to run." Lucian didn't look back. "There's a fire escape on the north side. Take it. Get to street level. My people will find you." "I'm not leaving you." "You don't have a choice." He emptied his magazine at the circling helicopters, forcing them back. "Go. Now!" Serafina ran. She made it to the north side fire escape, started climbing down, hands slipping on wet metal. Above her, gunfire, shouting, the whump 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 of helicopter blades. She was 3 floors down when the explosion ripped through the roof. The shockwaves slammed her against the building. She clung to the fire escape, ears ringing, and looked up through the smoke. The entire top floor was engulfed in flames. "Lucien!" Her scream tore her throat raw. No answer, just fire, smoke, the screaming of sirens in the distance. Serafina hung there, suspended between earth and inferno, and felt her entire world collapse into ash. Then hands grabbed her from below. She looked down. Vittorio Russo stood on the fire escape landing, flanked by 4 armed men. "Come on," he shouted. "We have to move." "Lucien's up there. He's gone." Vittorio's face was grim. "The boss is gone, and if we don't get you out of here right now, you're next." Serafina let them pull her down, let them shove her into an armored car, let them drive her through chaos and smoke while her mind replayed the same 3 words over and over. "He's gone. He's gone. He's gone." The safe house was an anonymous building in the industrial district. Vittorio dragged her inside and locked the door behind them. His men took up positions at every window. Serafina collapsed on a chair, shaking violently. Vittorio poured her a glass of something amber. Drink. She drank. It burned all the way down. What happened? Her voice didn't sound like her own. The Russians planted explosives on the roof, remotely detonated. Vittorio's jaw was tight. Lucien knew it was a trap. He stayed anyway to give you time to escape. Is he? She couldn't finish the sentence. Vittorio didn't answer, which was answer enough. Serafina stared at her hands. They were covered in soot and blood. She'd fired a gun tonight, tackled a trained operative, kissed the man she loved and told him she'd stay. And he'd died anyway. Your father, Vittorio said quietly. We found him 6 blocks away, dead. Single gunshot to the back of the head. Russian execution style. Serafina felt nothing. Good. The girl who walked into Loro 3 days ago wouldn't have said that. That girl doesn't exist anymore. Serafina looked up and Vittorio actually flinched at whatever he saw in her eyes. She died on that roof with him. Vittorio studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a phone and set it on the table. Lucian left you something, in case things went bad. Serafina picked up the phone with trembling hands. There was a single video file. She pressed play. Lucien's face filled the screen. He was in his office, probably recorded days ago. He looked tired, alive. Serafina, his recorded voice said. If you're watching this, I'm either dead or close to it, and I need you to listen very carefully. She couldn't breathe. Everything I own is yours now. Every account, every property, every business, legitimate and otherwise. Vittorio has the access codes. The organization answers to you. On screen, Lucien leaned forward. I know you don't want this. I know you'll try to walk away, but you can't. The Russians won't stop until the Drakov Empire is completely destroyed, and you're the last piece standing. His expression softened. You're stronger than you think, smarter, more dangerous. I saw it the first night we met, hiding under all that ugly makeup. You were always meant for this world, Serafina. You just needed someone to show you how to survive in it. He reached toward the camera, as if he could touch her through the screen. Don't let my death be meaningless. Take everything I built and make it yours. Burn the Russians to the ground. And when you're standing on top of the ashes, his smile was sad, knowing. Remember that I loved you. The video ended. Serafina sat in the silence, the phone clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Vittorio cleared his throat. What do you want to do? She looked at him. Really looked. This old soldier who doubted her, mocked her, and now stood ready to follow her orders because a dead man had commanded it. How many men do we have left? Her voice was steel. 43. Maybe 50 if we pull from the outer territories. Call them in, all of them. Serafina stood, and she felt different, harder, forged in fire and blood. We're going to find every single Russian involved in this, and we're going to make them regret the day they decided to start a war with the Drakov Empire. Vittorio's scarred face split into a vicious grin. Now you sound like a boss. I'm not a boss. Serafina's eyes were flat and cold. I'm a widow, and I'm going to make sure my husband's killers learn the difference. She walked to the window and looked out at Naples burning in the distance. Somewhere in that city, the men who'd murdered Lucien were celebrating, planning their next move, thinking they'd won. They were wrong. Serafina Vale had spent her entire life being invisible, being weak, being prey. But prey could learn to hunt, and she was about to teach the monsters what it meant to be afraid. Outside, sirens wailed through the night. Inside, Vittorio began making calls, assembling an army, and Serafina stood at the window, watching her old life burn away with the skyline, and felt something dark and terrible take root in her chest. Not grief, not fear. Vengeance, cold, absolute, and utterly unstoppable. The war had just begun. Serafina stood in the safe house war room, a converted warehouse basement lined with monitors, weapons racks, and tactical maps of Naples spread across every surface. 43 men filled the space, all of them staring at her with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. She was 24 years old, a woman, an outsider who'd been in Lucien's life for less than a week, and she was asking them to follow her into a war that had already killed their king. Vittorio stood at her right shoulder, arms crossed, face unreadable. He'd assembled the men. But he hadn't vouched for her, not yet. That was something she'd have to earn herself. Serafina stepped forward, and every eye tracked her movement. She wore tactical pants and a black shirt borrowed from Lucien's closet. Too big in the shoulders, but it smelled like him. Like cedar and gunpowder and everything she'd lost. She let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then she spoke. 3 days ago, I was nobody. A girl in an ugly sweater trying to escape a marriage contract I didn't ask for. Her voice was steady, cold. Today, Lucien Drakov is dead. My father is dead. And the Russian syndicate thinks they've won. She grabbed a tactical knife from the weapons table and drove it into the map, pinning a location in the warehouse district. They're wrong! A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Russians have been dismantling this organization for 8 months, Serafina continued. They used my father as an inside source. They sabotaged shipments, leaked intelligence, and finally, they killed your boss on a rooftop while celebrating their victory. She pulled out the tablet with her father's bank records and threw it onto the table hard enough to crack the screen. Here's every transaction, every communication, every piece of evidence that proves they're not untouchable. She met the eyes of the nearest soldier. They made one mistake. They left me alive, and now I'm going to use everything Lucien taught me to burn their empire to ash. Silence. Then one of the older capos, a man with graying hair and a scar across his throat, laughed outright. You're a child playing dress-up, he sneered. What do you know about war? Serafina walked straight up to him. She was a full foot shorter, but she didn't flinch. I know the Russians are meeting tonight at the Rostov import warehouse to celebrate Lucien's death, she said quietly. I know their inner circle will be there. Dmitry Volkov, Anton Sokolov, and Mikhail Petrov, the 3 men who orchestrated everything. The capo's sneer faltered. I know they think we're broken, scattered, too weak to retaliate. Serafina's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire room. And I know that if we hit them tonight, hard, fast, and without mercy, we can cut the head off this organization before they consolidate power. She stepped back, addressing the whole room again. Lucien left me everything. His accounts, his properties, his legacy. But I don't want any of it if the people who killed him get to walk away. Her hands clenched into fists. So I'm asking you to choose. Walk away now, and I'll make sure you're compensated and protected. Or stay. Help me finish this war, and when we're standing on top of their graves, you'll know you avenged the man who built this empire. The room erupted in noise. Men arguing, shouting, debating. Some headed for the door immediately. Others stayed rooted in place, torn. Vittorio raised a hand, and the noise died. I've served the Drakov family for 30 years, he said, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. Watched Lucien grow from a boy into the most dangerous man in Naples. And in all that time, I never saw him look at anyone the way he looked at her. He turned to face Serafina. You're untested, you're young, you have no idea what you're asking these men to do. Vittorio's scarred face was unreadable. But Lucien trusted you, and he was never wrong about people. He pulled his gun, checked the magazine, and slammed it back into place. So let's go kill some Russians. The room exploded with energy. Men who'd been edging toward the door turned back. Weapons were grabbed from racks, tactical gear distributed. Within minutes, the skepticism transformed into something sharp and lethal. Purpose. Serafina exhaled slowly, feeling her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd done it, convinced them. Now she just had to keep them alive. Vittorio pulled her aside while the men geared up. You understand what you just committed to? Yes. No, you don't. His eyes were hard. War isn't standing in a penthouse firing a gun at shadows. It's blood in your mouth and watching men you know die screaming. It's making choices that'll haunt you for the rest of your life. I know. You think you know. Vittorio grabbed her shoulder. But once you cross this line, there's no going back. You'll have blood on your hands that won't wash off. You'll be exactly what those Russians think you are. A killer. Serafina met his gaze without flinching. Good. Maybe then they'll finally take me seriously. Vittorio studied her for a long moment. Then he released her and turned away. Suit up, he said. We move in 20 minutes. The convoy rolled through Naples under cover of darkness, 5 armored SUVs, engines purring like predators. Serafina rode in the lead vehicle with Vittorio and 3 soldiers who looked like they could break concrete with their bare hands. She wore a tactical vest over Lucian's shirt, a gun at her hip. Her hands were steady now, no shaking, no fear, just cold, crystalline focus. The warehouse is a fortress, Vittorio explained, pulling up blueprints on a tablet. 3 floors, reinforced doors, Russian security patrols every entrance. They'll see us coming from a mile away. Then we don't come from the entrances. Serafina traced a finger along the building's eastern wall. What's this? Old sewer access, condemned 20 years ago. Is it still functional? Vittorio zoomed in. Probably, but it'll be tight, flooded, could collapse. Perfect. Serafina looked up. We send a team through the sewer, hit them from below while they're watching the streets. One of the soldiers grunted approval. Divide their focus. Smart. I'll lead the sewer team, Serafina said. Absolutely not. Vittorio's voice was flat. You stay in the command vehicle. No. You're the boss now. The boss doesn't run into a death trap. Lucian would have. Serafina's eyes were steel. And I'm not asking anyone to go somewhere I won't follow. Vittorio swore viciously, but he didn't argue further. They parked 6 blocks from the warehouse and moved on foot through the industrial district. The night was cold, damp with sea spray. Serafina's breath misted in the air as they crept between shipping containers and abandoned machinery. The Rostov import warehouse loomed ahead, a massive concrete structure lit by harsh floodlights. Russian guards patrolled the perimeter, weapons visible, radios crackling. Vittorio's team split into 3 groups, main assault force at the front, sniper team taking position on the adjacent building, and Serafina's team, 6 soldiers and Vittorio himself, heading for the sewer access on the eastern wall. The entrance was hidden behind overgrown weeds and rusted chain link. One of the soldiers cut through the fence with bolt cutters, and they slipped inside. The sewer grate was exactly where the blueprints showed, corroded, ancient. When they pried it open, the smell hit like a physical force, rot and stagnant water and decades of decay. Serafina didn't hesitate. She dropped into the darkness. The water came up to her knees, cold and thick with filth. Her boots squelched in sediment. The tunnel was barely 5 feet high, forcing them to crouch as they moved forward. Pipes dripped overhead. Something scuttled in the shadows. Serafina focused on breathing through her mouth and kept moving. Behind her, the soldiers followed in single file, weapons raised, night vision goggles turning their eyes into glowing green orbs. The tunnel branched. Vittorio checked his compass and pointed left. They waded through the darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Then they heard it. Voices above, muffled by concrete, Russian. Vittorio held up a fist. Everyone stopped. He pointed up. There, a maintenance hatch, old, rusted, leading directly into the warehouse basement. 2 soldiers moved forward and carefully wedged crowbars into the hatch seal. They applied pressure slowly, minimizing noise. The metal groaned softly. Once, twice, then the hatch popped open. Vittorio went first, pistol leading. He pulled himself up and disappeared into the darkness above. A moment later, his hand reappeared, gesturing them up. One by one, they climbed into the warehouse basement. The space was massive, concrete pillars supporting the floors above, crates stacked floor to ceiling, dim emergency lighting casting everything in sickly yellow. And everywhere, the sound of footsteps, voices. The Russian celebration happening 2 floors above them. Serafina pulled out her gun and checked the safety. Her heart was a drum in her chest. This was it. No turning back. Vittorio gestured toward a service stairwell. They moved in formation. Professional, silent, deadly. The first floor was storage. Empty. They cleared it in 90 seconds and moved to the stairs. Second floor. The voices got louder. Music, laughter, the sounds of men who thought they'd already won. Serafina pressed herself against the wall beside the stairwell door and listened. At least 20 voices. Maybe more. All Russian. All armed. Vittorio looked at her, raised an eyebrow. Last chance to back out. Serafina shook her head. No. He nodded and pressed his radio. All teams. We're in position. On my mark. The response crackled through. Snipers ready? Assault team ready? Vittorio counted down on his fingers. 3, 2, 1. Go. Chaos erupted. The front entrance exploded inward as Vittorio's assault team blew the doors with shaped charges. Gunfire erupted immediately. Rifles, pistols, the distinctive crack of sniper fire from above. Serafina's team kicked open the stairwell door and poured onto the second floor. The Russians were caught completely off guard. They'd been drinking, celebrating around tables covered with vodka and cocaine. When the door burst open, half of them were still scrambling for weapons. Serafina fired 3 times. The nearest Russian went down, blood blooming across his chest. She kept moving, muscle memory from hours of training in the penthouse taking over. Beside her, Vittorio fought like a demon, brutal, efficient, no wasted movement. He put 2 rounds in a man's skull, kicked another in the knee hard enough to shatter bone, and moved to the next target without pause. The room was a nightmare of smoke and muzzle flashes and screaming. Serafina ducked behind a pillar as bullets chewed through the concrete. Her ears rang. Adrenaline turned everything sharp and clear and surreal. She popped out, fired, ducked back. A Russian charged her position with a knife. She shot him twice in the chest. He kept coming. She shot him in the face. He dropped. She didn't feel anything. No horror, no remorse. Just cold calculation. Next target. The firefight lasted 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. When the smoke cleared, 15 Russians were dead or dying. 5 had surrendered. 3 had escaped deeper into the warehouse. Vittorio grabbed one of the survivors by the collar. "Where's Volkov?" The Russian spit in his face. Vittorio shot him in the foot. The man screamed, "Where is Volkov?" "3rd floor," the Russian gasped. "Private office. He's waiting for you, you stupid—" Vittorio shot him again and let him drop. He turned to Serafina, face splattered with blood. "It's a trap." "I know." Serafina reloaded her gun with shaking hands. "We go anyway." They regrouped with the assault team, now down to 28 men. 8 dead, 7 wounded, the cost of 3 minutes of violence. Serafina looked at their faces, young and old, scared and furious, all of them following her into hell because a dead man had told them to. She wouldn't let it be for nothing. "3rd floor," she said. "Volkov's waiting. He wants us to come. So we give him what he wants." They moved up. The 3rd floor was different, clean, corporate. Offices with glass walls and expensive furniture. And at the far end of a long corridor, a single door marked with Cyrillic letters. Every instinct Serafina had screamed, "Trap." But Lucien was dead because she'd hesitated, because she'd let him sacrifice himself on that rooftop. Not this time. She kicked open the door. The office was opulent. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. And sitting behind the desk, calm as death itself, was Dmitry Volkov. He was older than Serafina expected. Mid-50s, gray hair, expensive suit. He looked more like a banker than a crime lord. Until you saw his eyes, cold, calculating, utterly devoid of mercy. "Miss Vale," Volkov said in accented English. "You're late. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." Serafina raised her gun. 20 weapons mirrored her movement, all aimed at Volkov's head. He didn't flinch. "You killed Lucien," Serafina said. "No." Volkov smiled. "Your father killed Lucien. I simply provided the explosives." Rage flared white-hot in her chest. She took a step forward. Volkov raised a hand. "Before you pull that trigger, you should know. This building is surrounded by 40 of my men, snipers on every rooftop, armored vehicles blocking the exits. You came here to kill me, but all you've done is trap yourself. Then we all die together." Serafina's finger tightened on the trigger. "Perhaps." Volkov leaned back in his chair. "Or you could listen to my offer. I don't make deals with dead men. Even when the dead man has something you want?" Volkov pressed a button on his desk. A screen descended from the ceiling. Security footage flickered to life. And Serafina's heart stopped, because the footage showed a hospital room, white walls, medical equipment, and in the bed, burned and broken and barely alive, Lucien. "No," she whispered. "The explosion should have killed him," Volkov said conversationally. "But your lover is remarkably difficult to kill. He survived. Barely. My men pulled him from the rubble and brought him to a private facility. The footage showed Lucian's chest rising and falling, shallow, pained, but alive. Alive. You're lying, Serafina said, but her voice cracked. Am I? Volkov zoomed in on Lucian's face. It was destroyed. Burns, lacerations, swelling so severe he was barely recognizable. But it was him. She'd know those scars anywhere. Here's my offer, Volkov continued. You surrender, right now. Your men lay down their weapons, and I give you Lucian, alive, in need of extensive medical care but salvageable. And if we refuse? Volkov pressed another button. On screen, a doctor entered Lucian's room, carrying a syringe. Then I have him killed while you watch. Serafina's world tilted, her gun wavered. Vittorio stepped forward. It's a trick. The footage could be fake. It's not fake. Volkov pulled out his phone and made a call. Doctor, raise the patient's left hand. On screen, the doctor moved to the bed. A moment later, Lucien's bandaged hand lifted weakly into view. Real time. Live feed. Lucian was alive. Serafina's mind raced. If she surrendered, Volkov would have both of them. He'd probably kill them anyway, just slower. But if she didn't surrender, Lucian died right now. She'd watch him die on that screen. No choice. No good options. Just impossible decisions. What do you really want? She asked quietly. The Drakov Empire. Volkov's smile was reptilian. Lucien's accounts. His properties. His connections. Sign everything over to me, and you both walk away. Alive. Free. Rich enough to start over somewhere far from Naples. You expect me to believe you'll just let us go? I expect you to understand I've already won. Volkov gestured at the screen. Lucien is destroyed. You're surrounded. Your organization is shattered. Taking your lives accomplishes nothing, but taking the empire? His eyes glittered. That's a prize worth the trouble. Serafina looked at Vittorio. The old soldier's face was stone, but his eyes said everything. It's your call. She looked at the screen, at Lucien fighting for every breath. She'd told him she loved him on that rooftop, told him she'd stay, build a life in his world. But that world was built on blood and violence and choices that destroyed souls. Was she really willing to trade an empire for his life? The answer came instantly. Yes. I'll sign, Serafina said. No! Vittorio grabbed her arm. You can't. He dies if I don't. Serafina pulled free. Bring me the contracts. Volkov produced papers from his desk drawer, already prepared. He'd known she'd choose Lucian, known she'd give up everything. Serafina took the pen with shaking hands, and in that moment, standing in the enemy's office with a gun to her head and the man she loved dying on screen, she understood something Lucian had tried to tell her from the beginning. Power wasn't about strength. It was about what you were willing to sacrifice. She signed the first page, then the second, each signature transferring billions in assets, properties, businesses, everything Lucian had built, gone. Volkov watched with satisfaction. Very good. And now, the screen went black. Volkov frowned, pressed buttons. Nothing. What did you do? He demanded. Serafina smiled. It was a terrible smile, cold and sharp as broken glass. I learned from the best, she said quietly. Then the lights went out, and all hell broke loose. What Volkov didn't know, what Serafina had been counting on, was that while she'd been signing contracts, Vittorio had been using hand signals to communicate with the soldiers outside the office. They'd cut the power to the entire building. In the sudden darkness, chaos erupted. Gunfire, shouting. Serafina dove behind Volkov's desk as bullets chewed through the office. Beside her, Vittorio was already moving, night vision goggles giving him the advantage. She heard Volkov curse in Russian, scrambling, running for the door. Serafina grabbed his ankle as he passed and yanked hard. He went down, skull cracking against the marble floor. Emergency lights flickered on, dim, red, barely enough to see. Serafina grabbed Volkov by the collar and shoved her gun under his chin. Where is he? Where's Lucian really? Volkov laughed through bloody teeth. You think I'd tell you? I think you will. Serafina pulled out the tactical knife she'd taken from the warehouse. Because I'm going to start cutting pieces off until you do. She wasn't bluffing. Volkov saw it in her eyes. The transformation. The girl who'd walked into Loro in an ugly sweater was gone. In her place was something else entirely, a queen forged in violence. "Warehouse on the docks," Volkov gasped. "Pier 17, medical facility in the basement." "If you're lying." "I'm not lying!" Blood dripped from his mouth. "He's there! Alive, I swear!" Serafina looked at Vittorio. The old soldier was grinning like a wolf. "Go," he said. "We'll handle this." She didn't need to be told twice. Serafina ran, through the office, down the stairs, into the warehouse chaos where Russians and Drakov soldiers were still fighting. She didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran toward the exit with every ounce of strength she had left. Behind her, gunfire, explosions, the sounds of war. Ahead, somewhere in the darkness, Lucian was alive, and she was going to bring him home, or die trying. She burst out of the warehouse into the cold night air, grabbed the nearest motorcycle from a dead soldier, and kicked it to life. The engine roared. Serafina pointed it toward the docks and opened the throttle. The city blurred past, wind whipped her hair, blood and soot crusted her skin. She didn't care. Lucien was alive. And nothing, not Volkov, not the Russians, not God himself, was going to keep her from him. Pier 17 loomed ahead, dark and silent. Serafina ditched the motorcycle and approached on foot, gun drawn. The warehouse door was locked. She shot the handle off and kicked it open. Inside, silence. Too much silence. Serafina moved through the shadows, heart hammering, until she found the stairs leading down. The basement was lit by flickering fluorescence. Medical equipment lined the walls. And in the center of the room, on a hospital bed surrounded by monitors, Lucien. He was unconscious, bandaged head to toe. Burns covered half his face, but his chest was rising and falling, alive. Serafina ran to him, dropped her gun, grabbed his hand. "Lucien, Lucien, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, gray and clouded with pain. "Serafina?" His voice was gravel, broken. "I'm here." Tears streamed down her face. "I'm right here." "You came." "Of course I came, you idiot." She pressed her forehead to his. "I told you I wasn't leaving." Lucian's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Stubborn. Rebel. You're stubborn rebel." Serafina kissed him gently, tasting blood and antiseptic and life. "We're getting you out of here." She started disconnecting monitors, checking vitals, everything she could remember from medical dramas. Lucien was stable, barely, but moving him could kill him. She didn't have a choice. Serafina pulled him into a sitting position. He gasped in pain, but didn't scream. "Can you stand? Can... try?" Together they got him to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, every step agony. But they moved. One step, then another. They made it to the stairs. That's when the door at the top exploded open. Volkov stood there, face twisted with rage, gun raised. "You signed the contracts," he snarled. "Those signatures are legally binding. The empire is mine." Serafina stepped in front of Lucien, shielding him with her body. "The contracts mean nothing. You coerced them under threat of death." "No court will care." Volkov descended the stairs slowly. "You lost, Miss Vale. Accept it." "I'm not done fighting." "Then you're a fool." He aimed at her chest. "Last words?" Serafina met his eyes, calm, cold, fearless. "You forgot one thing." "What?" "I'm not alone." The gunshot came from behind Volkov. He jerked forward, eyes wide with shock, and collapsed down the stairs. Behind him, in the doorway, Vittorio stood with his smoking gun. "Empire's not yours," the old soldier said. "Never will be." He walked down the stairs and put 2 more bullets in Volkov's skull, just to be sure. Then he looked at Lucien and Serafina, both bloodied and broken but alive, and nodded. "Let's go home, boss." Serafina helped Lucien up the stairs, through the warehouse, into the waiting SUV. As they pulled away from the docks, she looked back at the burning building and felt something shift inside her. The war wasn't over. But they'd survived the worst of it. And as Lucien's hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining, Serafina realized something that made her smile through the tears. They'd won. They'd won. But victory tasted like ashes and blood. The private medical facility was hidden in the hills outside Naples, a converted villa surrounded by armed guards and silence. Lucien lay in the master bedroom, unconscious for the third day straight, while doctors worked around the clock to keep him alive. Burns covered 40% of his body. 3 broken ribs, collapsed lung, internal bleeding they'd barely managed to stop. The explosion should have killed him. Sometimes Serafina wondered if dying would have been kinder. She sat beside his bed in a chair she hadn't left except to use the bathroom, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath layers of bandages. The doctors had warned her. Even if he survived, he'd never be the same. The burns would scar. The lung damage was permanent, and the psychological trauma of being buried alive in fire. But he was breathing. That was enough. Vittorio appeared in the doorway carrying coffee and the exhausted expression of a man who'd spent 72 hours cleaning up a war zone. "Update," he said, handing her the cup. Serafina took it gratefully. "He's stable, still unconscious." "I meant the Empire." She looked up. "What's left of it?" Vittorio pulled over a chair and sat with the groan of old bones protesting. "Volkov's dead. His lieutenants scattered. The Russian syndicate's in chaos. Internal power struggle. Everybody trying to fill the vacuum. They're too busy killing each other to come after us." "Good. We lost 23 men at the warehouse. Another 8 wounded. 3 dead from the hospital we raided to get medical supplies." Vittorio's voice was flat, reporting casualties like reading a grocery list. "But we held the core territories. The legitimate businesses are intact, and every capo who survived has sworn loyalty to you." Serafina stared at her coffee. 23 dead. Men with families, lives, futures, gone because she'd asked them to follow her into hell. "How many of them would have died if we'd done nothing?" she asked quietly. Vittorio understood immediately. All of them. The Russians weren't taking prisoners. This was an extermination campaign. So we traded their deaths for ours. We traded their deaths for survival. Vittorio leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "War doesn't have clean victories. You did what Lucien would have done, what any boss would have done. You protected what mattered." "Did I?" Serafina looked at Lucien's broken body. "Or did I just prove I'm exactly what my father raised me to be? A weapon pointed at whatever target serves me best?" "Your father was a coward who sold his daughter to save himself." Vittorio's voice turned hard. "You're a woman who walked into a war zone to save the man she loves. There's a difference." Before Serafina could respond, Lucien's hand twitched. She dropped the coffee cup. It shattered on the marble floor, and grabbed his fingers. "Lucien, can you hear me?" His eyes opened, slowly, painfully. The left one was swollen nearly shut, the right clouded with medication. But they focused on her face. "Serafina." His voice was destroyed, barely a rasp. "You're real." "I'm real." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm right here." "Thought, dream." Each word was agony. "Thought I was dead." "You almost were." She pressed her forehead to his hand, feeling the rough texture of burned skin. "But you're too stubborn to die." Lucien's lips curved fractionally, almost a smile. "Learned from the best." Vittorio cleared his throat. "I'll get the doctor." He left quickly, giving them privacy. Serafina climbed onto the bed carefully, mindful of his injuries, and curled against his unburned side. Lucien's arm came around her weakly, holding her like she might disappear. "Tell me," he whispered, "what happened?" So she did. She told him everything. The warehouse battle, Volkov's trap, the contracts she'd signed and then destroyed, the final confrontation at the docks, his rescue, the 3 days she'd spent watching him fight for every breath. When she finished, Lucien was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You became a queen. I became a killer. Same thing. In our world." His fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. "How many?" She didn't pretend to misunderstand. 4, directly. Dozens more indirectly through orders. Regret it? Serafina thought about the Russian she'd shot in the face, the man she'd tackled in her father's apartment, the signed contract she'd used to manipulate Volkov into revealing Lucien's location. "No," she said finally. I'd do it again. Good. Lucien's breathing was labored but steady. Because the ones who survive are the ones who can live with their choices. Is that what you've been doing? Living with yours? Some days better than others. He shifted, wincing. But I've never regretted you. Serafina kissed his jaw gently, avoiding the burns. Even though I destroyed your empire trying to save you? The empire can be rebuilt. You can't be replaced. The words settled into her chest like stones, heavy, permanent. The doctor arrived with Vittorio, and Serafina reluctantly moved aside while they examined Lucien. Vitals were checked, medications adjusted, prognosis delivered with clinical detachment, 6 months recovery minimum, possible permanent lung damage, scars that would never fully heal, but alive. When they left, Lucien reached for Serafina's hand again. There's something else, he said. Something you need to know. Her stomach clenched. What? The contracts you signed with Volkov. Before you destroyed them. They were coerced. Legally meaningless. Legally, yes. But you still signed them. Every bank, every government agency, every business partner, they all saw documentation showing you transferred ownership of the Drakov Empire to a Russian crime syndicate. Lucien's eyes were serious. Even though Volkov's dead, those signatures exist. People will question your authority, your legitimacy. Serafina sat up. What are you saying? I'm saying the empire is broken, and putting it back together won't be as simple as killing the right people. Lucien struggled to sit, refusing help. You'll spend years fighting legal battles, corruption investigations, rival syndicates who smell weakness. It'll be war, Serafina, just a different kind. Then we fight. No. He cupped her face with his unbandaged hand. You choose, right now, before you're in too deep to walk away. I already made my choice. You made it under duress, in a war zone with a gun to your head. Lucien's thumb traced her cheekbone. Now you make it again, knowing exactly what it costs. Serafina pulled back. What are you doing? Giving you freedom. His voice was gentle but unyielding. The contract your father signed is void. Volkov's dead. The immediate threat is gone. You can walk away, take money from my accounts, enough to live comfortably anywhere in the world. Start over. Build a life that isn't soaked in blood. Without you. With or without me, your choice. Serafina stood and walked to the window. Outside, the hills rolled down toward Naples, the city glittering in the distance like a jewel box full of broken glass. Somewhere down there, men were still fighting over territory, still killing each other for power, still playing games where human lives were currency. She'd been part of that game for less than a week, and she'd become a killer. When I was hiding in that ugly sweater, she said quietly, I used to dream about escaping. Going somewhere no one knew my name, starting fresh. She pressed her palm against the cool glass. But those dreams were always empty, because I was running from something instead of running toward it. She turned back to Lucien. You asked me what I wanted, that first night at Loro, and I couldn't answer because I'd spent so long not wanting anything that I'd forgotten how. Serafina crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. But I know now. I want to build something that matters, something my father could never destroy, something that proves invisible girls can become queens. Even if it means war, especially if it means war. She took his hand. Because the alternative is going back to being invisible, and I'd rather die fighting than disappear again. Lucien searched her face for a long moment. Then he smiled, painful, exhausted, proud. Then we rebuild. Together. Together, Serafina agreed, and she meant it. The rebuilding took months. Serafina moved through the underworld like a storm, learning the language of power and violence with terrifying speed. She attended meetings where old capos tested her with barely veiled contempt. She negotiated with politicians who assumed she'd be easy to manipulate. She stared down rival syndicate leaders who thought a young woman couldn't possibly hold Lucien's empire together. They were all wrong. Where Lucien had ruled through fear and reputation, Serafina ruled through something more dangerous: intelligence and adaptability. She restructured the organization, cutting out the bloated inefficiencies and corruption that had made them vulnerable. She diversified the legitimate businesses, creating revenue streams that didn't depend on smuggling or extortion. And when violence was necessary, she didn't hesitate. But she never forgot the cost. Every decision was measured against the lives it would affect. Every order came with the weight of knowing men might die executing it. She kept a list, names of everyone who'd fallen protecting the empire. 23 from the warehouse battle, 8 from various skirmishes during the rebuilding, 12 more from a failed assassination attempt by remnants of the Russian syndicate. 43 names, 43 ghosts. She read the list every morning, reminded herself what power cost. Lucien recovered slowly. The burns healed into twisted scars that mapped his torso like a topographical chart of hell. His lung never fully recovered. He tired easily, couldn't run anymore, slept sitting up most nights to breathe properly. The psychological damage was harder to quantify. Nightmares, flashbacks, moments where he'd wake screaming about being buried alive. But he survived. And together they transformed the Drakov Empire into something new. 6 months after the warehouse battle, they stood on the balcony of the rebuilt penthouse overlooking Naples. The city sparkled below them, lights reflecting off the bay, Vesuvius looming in the distance, the maze of streets where their war had been fought. "I never thanked you," Lucien said quietly. Serafina leaned against the railing. "For what?" "For choosing this." He gestured at the city. "For choosing me. You gave me a choice. That's more than anyone else ever did." "Your father—" "My father is dead." Serafina's voice was flat. "And I don't mourn him." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Serafina said, "I went to his grave yesterday." Lucien looked at her sharply. "Why?" "Because I needed to say something." She stared out at the city. "I stood there looking at that cheap headstone. Nobody came to his funeral except the priest we paid, and I tried to feel something, anger, grief, anything." "What did you feel?" "Nothing." Serafina's hands clenched on the railing. "Just emptiness, like he'd already been dead to me long before the Russians killed him." "That's not unusual. After what he did, it's not what he did." She turned to face Lucien. "It's what I've become because of it. I look at his grave and I can't even remember what it felt like to be that girl in the ugly sweater. That version of me is gone, dead, buried under all the choices I've made since." Lucien pulled her close, careful of his still healing ribs. "Do you regret it? Becoming this?" Serafina pressed her face against his chest and listened to his damaged lungs working. "Sometimes. Late at night when I'm reading the list of names, when I see the widows of men who died on my orders, when I remember that I'm responsible for all of it. But then I remember what invisibility felt like, how small I was, how powerless." She looked up at him. "And I realize I'd rather carry the weight of these choices than go back to carrying nothing at all." Lucien kissed her forehead. "That's the difference between a boss and a victim. Bosses carry weight, victims get crushed by it." "Which one are you?" He laughed softly, a sound that still hurt his damaged lung. "I'm a survivor who's learning to be something better, thanks to you." Serafina pulled back. "There's something I want to do, something I need your help with." "Anything." She took a breath. "I want to start a foundation, using the legitimate business profits, for kids whose parents destroy them through addiction or debt or violence. Give them options, education, support, a chance to be something other than invisible." Lucien studied her face. "You want to save the people you used to be. I want to prove that damage doesn't have to be permanent." Serafina's eyes were fierce. "That broken things can be rebuilt into something stronger. It'll be expensive, complicated. People will question why a crime boss is running a charity." "Let them question," Serafina smiled. "I'm good at making people regret underestimating me." Lucien laughed again, genuine this time, despite the pain. "Yes, you are." The foundation launched 3 months later. They called it the Veil Foundation, using Serafina's family name instead of Drakov's. It was deliberate, a reclamation of something her father had tried to destroy. The first facility opened in the poorest district of Naples, offering after-school programs, counseling, and scholarships. The cynics called it money laundering. The politicians called it publicity. The rival syndicates called it weakness. The kids called it hope. Serafina spent 2 afternoons a week at the facility, working with teenagers who reminded her painfully of her younger self. Angry, scared, desperate to be seen. She saw them. One girl in particular, 17, covered in bruises from a father who drank himself violent every night, reminded Serafina so much of her past that it hurt to look at her. "Why do you care?" the girl asked during a counseling session. "You're rich, powerful. What do you know about being invisible?" Serafina pulled up her sleeve, showing the scars from the warehouse battle. Then she unbuttoned her collar, revealing the faint mark where a Russian had tried to strangle her during the penthouse attack. "I know that invisible doesn't mean powerless," she said quietly. "I know that the world tries to break girls like us because it's easier than letting us become dangerous. And I know that every time we choose to survive instead of disappear, we're proving them wrong." The girl stared at the scars. "How did you stop being afraid?" "I didn't." Serafina buttoned her collar back up. "I just decided to be afraid and fight anyway." The girl left the session different. Straighter spine, harder eyes, the look of someone who decided to stop being prey. Serafina recognized it immediately. She'd worn that same look walking out of Loro 6 months ago. The empire stabilized, slowly, painfully. But it stabilized. Serafina negotiated treaties with rival syndicates, establishing territories and trade agreements that reduced violence by 40% in the first year. She rooted out the remaining traitors inside the organization, 3 more capos who'd been feeding information to the Russians. She made examples of them. Public. Brutal. Necessary. Word spread through the underworld. The Drakov Empire was under new management, and the new queen was not to be underestimated. But the most important change happened quietly. Serafina and Lucien stood in the studio, the one that had been violated by Volkov's surveillance. She'd avoided it for months, unable to look at the space without remembering the tracking device hidden in the birth of Venus. But today, she walked in with purpose. "I want to tear it down," she said. "All of it. The books, the tools, everything that was tainted." Lucien leaned against the doorframe, still moving carefully to protect his damaged ribs. "And rebuild it? No." Serafina ran her fingers along the workbench. "Build something new, something that's mine. Not a gift, not a trap, just mine." "What do you want it to be?" She thought about the girl at the foundation with bruises and fire in her eyes, thought about the list of 43 names she read every morning, thought about the person she'd become, killer and savior, queen and survivor, damaged and dangerous in equal measure. "An art studio," she said finally. "But not for me. For them. The kids at the foundation. Give them space to create, to be seen." Lucy's chin smiled. "I'll have it built." "No." Serafina turned to face him. "We'll build it, together, with our own hands." So they did. Over the next 3 months, they transformed the violated studio into something sacred, cleared out every piece of equipment Volkov had touched, ripped up the floors, repainted the walls in colors chosen by the kids themselves, violent purples and electric blues and defiant reds. It was exhausting work. Lucien's damaged lung made him tire quickly. Serafina's hands blistered and bled. But they built. And when it was finished, they stood in the center of the new studio, surrounded by easels and clay and possibility, and Serafina felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness, not contentment, just peace with who she'd become. "Thank you," she said. Lucien pulled her close. "For what?" "For seeing me, even when I was hiding. Thank you for letting yourself be seen." They stood there in the light pouring through the skylights, 2 broken people who'd rebuilt each other into something stronger, and Serafina understood the truth. Diamonds did shine in the dark, but only if you were brave enough to let them. 1 year after the warehouse battle, Serafina stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the penthouse and stared at her reflection. Gone was the ugly sweater and cheap makeup. In their place, a tailored suit that fit like armor, hair pulled back in a severe bun, minimal jewelry except for the ring on her left hand. Not an engagement ring, a signet ring. The Drakov crest. Lucienne had given it to her 3 months ago during a meeting with the entire organization. "She's not my wife," he'd announced, sliding the ring onto her finger in front of every capo. "She's my equal, my partner, and she speaks with my full authority." The ring was heavy, permanent, a symbol of power and responsibility that would never come off. Serafina touched it now, feeling the cold metal against her skin. She looked different, moved different, even breathed different than she had a year ago. The invisible girl was gone. In her place stood someone dangerous. Lucien appeared in the doorway behind her, reflected in the mirror. His scars had faded to silver lines mapping his torso. He still moved carefully, protecting his damaged lung. But he was alive. They were both alive. "Ready?" he asked. Today was the first anniversary memorial for the 43 men who died in the warehouse battle. Serafina had organized it personally, a private ceremony at the foundation, followed by a gathering where families could share stories and grief without judgment. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." Lucien crossed the bathroom and wrapped his arms around her from behind. They stood like that for a moment, two scarred survivors holding each other in the morning light. "I love you," he said quietly, "not despite what you've become, because of it." Serafina turned in his arms and kissed him. It was soft, gentle, nothing like their first desperate kiss in the shattered penthouse. This was different. This was chosen. "I love you too," she whispered against his mouth, "even though you turned me into a monster." "You were never a monster." Lucien pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "You were always this strong. I just gave you permission to stop hiding it." They drove to the foundation together. The memorial was simple but powerful. 43 candles arranged in a semicircle, families standing in quiet grief. Serafina read each name aloud, voice steady, refusing to let shame or guilt make her falter. These men had died following her orders. The least she could do was remember them. When the ceremony ended, an older woman approached. Serafina recognized her, wife of one of the soldiers who died at the docks. "Mrs. Castellano," Serafina said quietly, "I'm so sorry for your loss." The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "My husband told me about you, the night before he died. He said you were different, said you actually cared whether we lived or died." Serafina's throat tightened. "I did. I do. I know." Mrs. Castellano's eyes were red from crying, but clear. "That's why I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Serafina stared. "I got your husband killed." "No, the Russians killed my husband. You gave him a chance to fight for something that mattered." The woman reached out and squeezed Serafina's hand. "He died protecting you, protecting this, and he was proud to do it." She walked away before Serafina could respond. Lucien appeared at her side. "You okay?" "I don't know." Serafina stared at the candles burning low. "How do you carry this? The weight of all these deaths?" "Carefully." Lucien took her hand. "And never alone." They stayed until the last candle burned out. Then they went home. 2 years after Serafina walked into Loro in an ugly sweater, the Drakov Empire was unrecognizable. Legitimate businesses now outpaced illegal revenue. The foundation had expanded to 3 facilities across southern Italy. Violence in their territories had dropped to historic lows. And Serafina Vale, once invisible, once prey, sat at the head of a conference table surrounded by capos, who would die on her order without question. She'd become exactly what Lucien had seen hiding beneath cheap makeup that first night, a queen. But she'd paid for the crown in blood and sleepless nights, and the names of 43 dead men she carried like stones in her chest. Worth it? She wasn't sure, but she was still standing. That evening, Serafina and Lucien stood on the penthouse balcony, watching the sunset paint Naples in shades of gold and crimson. His arm was around her shoulders. Her head rested against his scarred chest. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Meeting me. Starting all of this." "Never. Even when you almost died?" "Especially then." Lucien pressed a kiss to her hair. "Because dying meant something. Most people in our world die for nothing. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong enemies. But I almost died protecting you, and that made it worth it." Serafina turned to look up at him. You're insane. Probably, he smiled. But so are you. She couldn't argue with that. They stood in silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the city lights flickered to life below them. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, going to normal jobs, having normal problems. Serafina didn't envy them. She'd been normal once, invisible, safe, and it had nearly destroyed her. I have something for you, Lucian said suddenly. He pulled a small box from his pocket and handed it to her. Serafina opened it carefully. Inside was a key. What's this? The deed to your father's old apartment building. Lucian's eyes were serious. I bought it 6 months ago. Renovated the entire structure. It's yours now. Do whatever you want with it. Serafina stared at the key. That cramped apartment where her father had screamed at her, where she'd painted herself ugly to escape a marriage contract, where the old version of herself had died piece by piece. Why? She whispered. Because some ghosts need to be exorcised. Lucienne closed her fingers around the key. Burn it down. Turn it into housing for the foundation. Sell it. Whatever gives you peace. Serafina thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I'm turning it into an art school, she said. For kids who think they're invisible. Show them they're not. Lucian smiled. Perfect. 3 months later, the school opened. Serafina cut the ribbon herself, standing in front of the building where she'd once hidden from the world, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not grief, not rage. Freedom. She was free. Free from her father's shadow. Free from the girl who'd been too afraid to want anything. Free from the lie that invisible meant powerless. The students poured into the building, angry kids with bruises and fire in their eyes. And Serafina saw herself in every single one of them. She'd been exactly where they were. And she'd survived. So would they. 5 years after the warehouse battle, Serafina stood in the rebuilt studio at the foundation watching a teenage girl sculpt clay with intense focus. The girl's name was Elena. 17. Father in prison. Mother dead from an overdose. Angry at the world and everyone in it. She reminded Serafina of herself so much it hurt. You're good at this, Serafina said quietly. Elena didn't look up. Thanks. You could go to art school. I can help with applications, scholarships. Why would you help me? Because someone once gave me permission to stop hiding, and it saved my life. Elena finally looked up. You really believe that? That broken things can be fixed? Serafina touched the scar on her collarbone. Barely visible now, but still there. Permanent. A reminder of the night she'd chosen to fight instead of flee. I believe broken things can become something stronger than they were before, she said, but only if you're brave enough to rebuild. Elena studied her face. What were you before? Invisible. And now? Serafina smiled. Dangerous. Elena went back to her sculpture, but something in her expression had changed. Lighter, more hopeful. Serafina left the studio and found Lucian waiting in the hallway. His breathing was still labored on stairs, but he'd learned to manage it. They walked together to the penthouse overlooking the city that had tried to destroy them both. How much longer do you think we have? Serafina asked as they stood on the balcony watching the stars emerge over Naples. Lucian knew what she meant. How long before the Empire turned on them? Before rivals saw weakness? Before the violence that had given them power finally consumed them? Long enough, he said. Long enough to build something that outlasts us. The foundation? You. He turned to face her. You're what outlasts us, Serafina. Every kid you save, every girl you teach to stop being invisible. That's the empire that matters. Serafina looked out at the glittering city and thought about the invisible girl in the ugly sweater who'd walked into Loro 5 years ago. That girl had wanted to escape. But this woman, scarred and dangerous and powerful, didn't want to escape anymore. She wanted to transform the world that had tried to break her. And she was doing it, one invisible kid at a time. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing diamonds in the dark. Serafina turned and kissed him. Even when everyone else just saw mud. Lucian pulled her close, and they stood together on the balcony overlooking their empire. Built from violence and redeemed through choice. and knew that whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together, scarred but surviving, broken but rebuilt, no longer hiding, never invisible again. And somewhere in the city below, in a small art studio filled with angry kids and possibility, a 17-year-old girl named Elena finished her sculpture and realized for the first time that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to disappear to survive. She could fight instead, just like the dangerous woman with kind eyes had taught her. The monster hadn't wanted to cage the girl. He'd wanted to set her free, and in freeing her, he'd found his own redemption. That was the truth Serafina understood now, standing in the ruins and reconstruction of the empire they'd built together. Power wasn't about control. It was about choice. And she'd chosen to become dangerous not for revenge or wealth or an empire, but for every invisible girl who needed permission to stop hiding. That was worth every scar, every name on the list, every nightmare and sacrifice and impossible decision. Because diamonds didn't shine in the dark by accident. They shone because someone was brave enough to see them. And once seen, once truly seen, they could never be buried again. The end, but also the beginning, because invisible girls were becoming dangerous all across the city, and the empire Serafina Vale had built from ashes would outlast them all.